Case 1, Brenda Spencer. On the morning of January 29, 1979, Brenda Spencer, a 16-year-old high school dropout, took her Ruger 10-22 rifle and opened fire on Grover Cleveland Elementary School in San Diego, California. From the window of her home, which was located directly across the street from the school, she shot at students and faculty with chilling precision. The result, 2 adults dead and 8 children and a police officer severely injured. What followed would be one of the most haunting and perplexing moments in true crime history. When authorities asked her why she had carried out the attack, Spencer's response was simple, chilling, and profoundly bizarre. "I don't like Mondays." The cold, almost casual nature of the statement raised more questions than it answered. No warning signs, no specific grievance, just an inexplicable distaste for the day of the week. Her motive remained an enigma, leaving law enforcement, media, and the public struggling to comprehend the senseless act. Was it a random outburst, a product of a troubled home life, or was it something far darker? Spencer would later claim she was just tired of being around, offering no further explanation. Her actions came without warning and, in a twisted sense, without any deeper motive. She wasn't targeting a specific individual or institution. It was an unprovoked, indiscriminate act of violence. The aftermath of the shooting left the community grappling with the horror of what had just happened. 2 adults, Principal Burton Ragg and a school custodian named Michael Suchar, lost their lives, and countless others were left physically and emotionally scarred. As Spencer was arrested and eventually convicted, her trial made waves not only because of the brutal attack, but also because of the disturbing lack of remorse. She was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. However, her answer, "I don't like Mondays," has continued to resonate over the years, symbolizing the unfathomable randomness of her actions and the bizarre detachment she seemed to have from the devastation she caused. The phrase itself has been etched into the history of school shootings as one of the most haunting and surreal motives in criminal history, epitomizing the inexplicable nature of human violence. Spencer's words seem to reflect the profound indifference to the lives she shattered, with the dark randomness of her motive offering no closure, no explanation, and no solace to the victims' families or the community at large. Her case remains one of the earliest examples of what would later become a tragic and familiar phenomenon, the school shooting with no clear reason, only a chilling, empty response from the perpetrator. Case 2, Joshua Davies. In 2010, the brutal murder of 15-year-old Rebecca Aylward by her boyfriend Joshua Davies shocked a small town in Wales. What makes this crime even more chilling is the bizarre, almost surreal motive that led to her death. A motive that started with a twisted joke and ended in cold-blooded murder. It all began 2 days before the murder when Davies, in a seemingly harmless text message, sent these words to his friend: "Don't say anything, but you may just owe me a breakfast." To the average person, it might seem like an inside joke, something said casually without much thought. But for Joshua Davies, it was a chilling prelude to a violent act that would forever change the lives of those involved. The bizarre origin of this crime lay in a conversation Davies had with his friend. It was no more than a joking offer. The friend would buy him breakfast if he killed someone.
The comment, intended to be a lighthearted jest, would become a catalyst for a shocking and senseless murder. On the day of Rebecca's death, Davies lured her to a remote area in the woods. He had planned it carefully, his actions cold and calculating, as he led her to a secluded spot. It wasn't an outburst of anger or a heat-of-the-moment decision. Davies had seemingly followed through on his bizarre deal, acting on a twisted dare. When the authorities found Rebecca's body, it was clear that this was no accident. The act of murder was premeditated, influenced by a strange conversation that went from playful to deadly in a heartbeat. The text, which read, "You may just owe me a breakfast," was not just a passing comment. It was a forewarning, a glimpse into the troubled mind of a teenager who was willing to kill for the sake of fulfilling a bizarre, dark bet. When the police arrested Davies, they were left to piece together the haunting details. The confession from his friend, who had made the offer of breakfast, would later come to light, revealing the strange influence it had on Davies. Yet, the question remained, could this truly be the result of a thoughtless joke, or was there something deeper at play? Was Davies simply influenced by his friend's words, or did he have a darker, more dangerous side that the world had yet to see? In the end, Joshua Davies was convicted of murder, but the unsettling nature of his motive, a mix of peer influence, twisted humor, and a lack of remorse, left everyone questioning how such a senseless act could be born from something as seemingly trivial as a joke. Case 3. Kevon Watkins. In 2018, a seemingly harmless decision spiraled into an unimaginable tragedy, changing the Watkins family forever. Kevon Watkins, a 16-year-old teen with a passion for gaming, faced a frustrating issue. His family's constant interruptions while he tried to get in a good gaming session. Tired of the disruptions and believing his internet connection was the cause of his poor performance, Kevon decided to take matters into his own hands. He changed the Wi-Fi password, effectively locking his family out. This, however, was not just an act of technical rebellion. It was the spark that ignited a firestorm of anger within his home. His mother, frustrated by the change, confronted him. The argument quickly escalated, with words flying and tensions mounting. But things took a dark turn when Kevon's younger sister, Alexis, tried to intervene, perhaps attempting to defuse the situation or simply tired of the constant family drama. But in that moment of chaos, something snapped. Kevon, overwhelmed by rage and the frustration that had been building up over time, lashed out at his sister. He grabbed her by the throat, choking her with terrifying force. His anger, once directed at his family's interference with his game, was now focused entirely on Alexis. What followed was a tragic and violent act. Kevon held his sister's throat until she lost consciousness, causing irreversible brain damage. In those horrifying moments, the gaming connection that had once seemed so important, the password change that had seemed like a small rebellion, became the tragic backdrop for a moment of violence that no one could have anticipated. Alexis, once full of life, was left in a coma, her brain severely damaged by the chokehold. In those horrifying moments, the bizarre nature of this crime lies not in the magnitude of the act itself, but in the seemingly trivial motive that fueled it. A dispute over a Wi-Fi password, a mere inconvenience in the digital age, became the catalyst for a deadly altercation. The violence that ensued was not born out of premeditation or long-standing animosity, but from a moment of explosive frustration. Kevon's crime was the result of a fragile temper, unaddressed anger, and a family dynamic fraught with tension. What started as a teenager's attempt to escape into the world of gaming turned into an irreversible tragedy. His actions not only took the life of his sister, but also shattered his family forever. A Wi-Fi password, of all things, had led to a fatal act of violence, forever altering their lives.
Case 4, Robert Lyons. It started as a typical mother-son relationship, strained but ordinary. Robert Lyons, a 39-year-old man struggling with mental health issues, lived with his 61-year-old mother, Linda Bolek, in Carroll Stream, Illinois. But on March 14, 2008, a seemingly trivial argument would spiral into a brutal and senseless crime. Robert wanted skybox tickets to an Avril Lavigne concert. His mother refused. What followed would shock the community and leave a family shattered. In a fit of rage, Robert attacked his mother after she refused his demand. First, he struck her over the head with a cognac bottle. As Linda lay helpless, Robert's anger escalated. He grabbed a knife and stabbed her repeatedly, 9 times to be exact. The brutality of the attack was chilling. One knife snapped inside her body, another bent. But Robert wasn't done. He desecrated her body with household chemicals, including Tilex, Drano, and Raid insecticide. Afterward, he casually changed his clothes, went shopping, and even visited a Hooters restaurant. No remorse, no fear of the consequences, just an eerie indifference. When the authorities finally found Linda's lifeless body, the truth began to unravel. Robert's actions after the murder were as bizarre as the crime itself. He offered a strange defense, claiming his mother attacked him with a kitchen knife. But investigators quickly discovered inconsistencies in his story. The crime scene painted a different picture, one of a premeditated, cold-blooded act. As the investigation progressed, Robert's behavior only raised more suspicion. Hours before his arrest, he was seen out in public as if nothing had happened. The trial was nothing short of gripping. Robert's defense team admitted he was responsible for Linda's death, but argued it wasn't premeditated. They painted the crime as an emotional outburst, a moment of uncontrolled rage. But the prosecution presented a damning case, showing how Robert had methodically executed the murder. The brutal nature of the crime, paired with Robert's utter lack of remorse, made the prosecution's argument unassailable. In January 2012, Robert Lyons was sentenced to 40 years in prison for first-degree murder. The judge described the crime as nothing short of monstrous. Linda's twin sister, devastated by the loss, spoke out, acknowledging that while nothing could bring her sister back, the verdict brought some measure of justice. Robert Lyons' case is a chilling reminder of the dangers that lie beneath seemingly normal family relationships. What started over a fight about concert tickets escalated into one of the most brutal, senseless murders. Robert's lack of remorse and his strange behavior after the crime left many asking, what drives a person to such violence? And how did something so trivial lead to a life-ending tragedy? A question that still lingers.
Did Robert's mental health issues contribute to the violence, or was it just the rage of a son denied something he wanted?
Case 5. Franklin Paul Crowe. In 2006, a brutal and chilling murder shocked a quiet community. Franklin Paul Crowe, a 31-year-old man with no prior criminal history, was about to change the lives of those around him forever. His victim, his own roommate. The motive for the crime, however, was as bizarre as it was tragic: an argument over toilet paper. Franklin and his roommate had been living together for several months. Like most roommates, they had a heated argument over who would buy toilet paper for their home. One seemingly innocent task, however, became the trigger for a violent and fatal confrontation. In a fit of rage, Crowe used a claw hammer and a sledgehammer to kill his roommate, a crime that shocked the community. It started as a typical disagreement over the smallest of matters, but Crowe, seemingly unable to manage his frustration, became consumed by anger. What began as a verbal argument quickly turned physical. Crowe, in a fit of rage, grabbed two deadly tools, a claw hammer and a sledgehammer, from a nearby toolbox. Without warning, he struck his roommate repeatedly with the weapons, leaving him with fatal injuries. The scene was gruesome. The violence was so extreme that it was clear this was no accident. Crowe's actions were not only brutal, but senseless. After the crime, he didn't attempt to flee or cover his tracks. Instead, he remained in the apartment, waiting for the authorities to arrive, though he did not immediately confess to the crime. The investigation into the murder was quick, with neighbors hearing noises that sounded like the tools being used. They had no idea that a petty disagreement had escalated to such horrifying levels. When law enforcement arrived, they were met with a chilling sight: Crowe's roommate lying lifeless on the floor, covered in blood. Crowe was arrested, and despite his silence about the details of the murder, the evidence spoke volumes. During the trial, it was revealed that Crowe had a history of anger issues, though there had been no signs that his volatile emotions would lead to such an extreme action. His defense claimed that Crowe's frustration over the trivial argument had been amplified by underlying stress and emotional instability, but the jury was not swayed. Franklin Paul Crowe was found guilty of second-degree murder. The case left a lasting impact on the community, raising troubling questions about how something as small as a disagreement could result in such a horrific act. It serves as a tragic reminder that violence can erupt from the most unexpected places, leaving lives destroyed over something as simple as a household chore. What was it that pushed Franklin Crowe to such extremes? Was it the argument itself, or was there more brewing beneath the surface? Only Crowe knows for sure. But one thing remains clear. This case was a horrifying reminder of how anger, no matter how trivial the cause, can have deadly consequences. Case 6. Richard Angelo. In the heart of Long Island, New York, Richard Angelo walked the halls of Good Samaritan Hospital as a trusted nurse. His calm demeanor and professional attitude hiding a dark, twisted secret. By day, he was the model employee, admired for his skill in emergency resuscitations. By night, he was a man driven by an insatiable hunger for recognition, willing to risk lives to fuel his ego. Angelo's bizarre and chilling motive was simple. He wanted respect.
But not the kind of respect earned through years of diligent care or heroic actions. No, Angelo craved admiration from his colleagues, and to achieve it, he devised a deadly scheme. He injected Pavulon, a paralytic drug, into his patients, deliberately inducing cardiac arrest. The victims, paralyzed but conscious, were left in a state of terror, unable to breathe as their hearts stopped. The real horror came when Angelo swooped in to save them. The nurse, in his twisted mind, believed that performing dramatic resuscitations, reviving patients in the nick of time, would cement his reputation as a life-saving hero. In a hospital where others would do their best to save lives in the wake of cardiac arrest, Angelo played the role of a savior, though he was the one who had pushed his victims to the brink of death in the first place. Angelo's reign of terror lasted for months, with 30 victims subjected to his lethal injections. But as the body count grew, so did the suspicions. Colleagues began to notice the strange pattern of cardiac arrests and miraculous recoveries, with Angelo always right there in the middle, performing CPR with dramatic flair. The pattern was too consistent to ignore, and soon an investigation was launched. It didn't take long for authorities to uncover the extent of Angelo's depravity. A forensic examination of 32 exhumed bodies revealed Pavulon in the systems of 7 patients. Angelo's deadly scheme was finally exposed, unraveling a narrative of manipulation and madness. His desire for praise had led him to commit the ultimate betrayal, taking lives in exchange for fleeting moments of admiration. In the aftermath, Angelo was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. He was sentenced to 60 years in prison, a fate befitting the monster he had become. His case remains one of the most chilling examples of a medical professional abusing their position, driven by a motive so bizarre and disturbing that it leaves the mind reeling. The question remains, how far will someone go for respect? For Richard Angelo, the answer was clear. Far enough to kill.
Case 7,
David L. Scott. In 2012, a chilling and bizarre crime unfolded in St. Louis. David L. Scott, a homeless man, found himself caught in a moment of desperation and rage that would forever alter the lives of those involved. The motive behind his violent act was anything but ordinary. It all began over something as innocuous as a bag of Cheetos. Roger Wilkes, an ordinary man going about his day, had no idea that a simple refusal to share a snack would lead to a deadly confrontation. The two men's paths crossed on a quiet street where Wilkes was eating his snack. What seemed like a harmless encounter quickly escalated when Scott asked for a share of the Cheetos, and Wilkes refused. For most, this would be an inconsequential moment, a minor exchange in an otherwise uneventful day. But for David L. Scott, it was the breaking point. Anger flared. There are no clear answers to why the situation escalated so violently. But in the blink of an eye, Scott pulled out a knife and plunged it into Wilkes' chest. The attack was sudden, unexpected, and deadly. The knife struck deep, severing arteries and leaving Wilkes with little chance for survival. The motive behind the attack baffled investigators. A bag of Cheetos, a seemingly trivial item, had sparked an act of violence that no one saw coming. Was it the hunger that pushed Scott over the edge? The frustration of living on the streets where survival becomes a daily battle? Or was it something deeper? A moment of rage, or a culmination of years of hardship and alienation? What followed was a blur of police sirens, the desperate rush to save Wilkes, and the chilling realization that a life had been lost over something so small. David L. Scott was arrested at the scene, his fate sealed in the aftermath of the brutal act. As the investigation unfolded, authorities dug into Scott's past, trying to piece together what drove him to commit such a senseless act. With no prior violent criminal record, the event stood out as a strange, unsettling anomaly. Was it the refusal over food that pushed Scott to the brink? Or had something snapped in him that day? The case left many unanswered questions, but one thing remained clear. A simple refusal to share a snack became the trigger for a senseless tragedy that shattered 2 lives in an instant. The true extent of what drove David L. Scott to murder remains unknown, leaving a chilling legacy behind.
Case 8, Curtis Reeves. In January 2014, a quiet evening at a Florida movie theater turned deadly over a simple request: stop texting. Curtis Reeves, a 71-year-old retired police officer, was sitting in the theater when the couple in front of him began texting during the previews of the film. As the glowing screens illuminated the dark room, Reeves, troubled by the disturbance, leaned forward and politely asked Chad Olson and his wife to stop. What followed would leave a man dead and an entire community stunned. Olson, who was enjoying the movie with his wife, didn't take kindly to the request. An argument erupted between the two parties, escalating quickly. According to Reeves, Olson threw a handful of popcorn at him in an act of aggression. The situation spiraled, and in a matter of seconds, Curtis Reeves did the unthinkable. In the middle of a dispute over texting during a movie, he pulled out his concealed firearm and shot Olson in the chest, killing him instantly. The scene in the theater turned from one of entertainment to horror in a flash. The lights flickered on, revealing the tragic aftermath. Panic spread as patrons rushed to call for help. Olson, a 43-year-old father, lay lifeless while Reeves, eerily calm, remained seated and waited for authorities to arrive. Reeves, with decades of experience as a police officer, claimed that he was acting in self-defense after feeling threatened by Olson's alleged aggression. But prosecutors weren't convinced. They argued that the shooting was an overreaction. The confrontation, they said, didn't warrant deadly force, especially given that Olson was unarmed. Instead of defending himself, they argued, Reeves had chosen to escalate a trivial situation into a fatal one. Reeves' defense tried to invoke Florida's controversial Stand Your Ground law, which permits individuals to use deadly force if they feel threatened. Yet, the jury found it hard to believe that Olson, sitting in front of a retired officer in a crowded theater, posed an immediate and lethal threat. In 2017, after years of legal battles, Reeves was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
The incident shocked the nation, raising questions about the fine line between self-defense and overreaction, the dangers of concealed carry, and whether the slightest provocation could lead to such a tragic outcome. What started as a simple request to stop texting during a movie became a senseless killing, forever altering the lives of those involved and reminding everyone of the thin veneer between civility and chaos.
Case 9, Noor Hussein. In 2011, a seemingly mundane disagreement escalated into a chilling act of violence. Noor Hussein, a 75-year-old man, killed his 66-year-old wife, Nazir Hussein, after a deeply bizarre and twisted motive. It all started when Nazir, preparing dinner, made a vegetarian meal. Instead of the requested goat meat, she served lentils, an innocent dish, but one that would ignite the fury of her husband. Noor, known for his controlling and violent nature, had a history of abusing his wife. For years, their neighbors had heard the echoes of his harsh words and violent outbursts. But on this night, the routine argument about food turned deadly. Noor's reaction to the absence of meat in his dinner was disproportionate, culminating in a brutal attack that left Nazir dead in their Brooklyn apartment. The evening's dispute, though seemingly trivial, was a trigger. Noor, furious that his wife did not cater to his exacting needs, grabbed a blunt object and repeatedly struck her more than 20 times. Nazir's death wasn't just the result of a single violent blow. It was the culmination of years of torment, punctuated by one meal. The simple act of preparing a vegetarian dish, something many would consider an ordinary, harmless choice, ultimately sealed her fate. In the aftermath, Noor's defense lawyer argued for a manslaughter charge, insisting his client had no intent to kill. But the prosecution painted a different picture. This wasn't an impulsive crime, but rather a deliberate act of rage rooted in a long history of abuse. The brutality of the crime was matched only by its senselessness. How could a meal, a basic human act, lead to such a horrific outcome? Neighbors and friends testified to Noor's long history of controlling behavior and emotional abuse. Nazir, despite being in her mid-60s, had lived under the shadow of her husband's dominance for decades. She had tried to escape before, but the violence always followed her. The night she made a vegetarian dinner, something that might seem trivial to many, was the moment that pushed Noor over the edge. The court was left grappling with the bizarre reality of how a simple meal could become the catalyst for murder. In July 2014, Noor was sentenced to 18 years to life in prison for second-degree murder. His violent outburst over something as mundane as dinner would ensure that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, a tragic reminder of how domestic violence can erupt in the most unlikely of circumstances.
Case 10. Annie, Kim. In January 2015, a seemingly innocent moment spiraled into a senseless tragedy that would capture the nation's attention. Annie Kim Pham, a 23-year-old aspiring artist, was out with friends at a Santa Ana nightclub when she became the target of a brutal and unprovoked attack. The cause? An accidental photobomb. It all began when Pham, who was standing outside the club, inadvertently stepped into the frame of a group's photo. What followed next was a shocking escalation of anger that would end in her death. The group of individuals, outraged by the minor interruption, decided to exact revenge in the most violent way possible.
The altercation quickly escalated from verbal insults to physical violence. One of the men in the group, later identified as a key instigator, confronted Pham, accusing her of ruining their picture. Despite her attempts to de-escalate, the situation spiraled out of control. Within moments, Pham was viciously attacked, punched, and kicked mercilessly by the group. Her friends, powerless to intervene, watched in horror as she was knocked to the ground. The attackers didn't stop there. Pham was left unconscious, lying on the cold pavement as the group fled the scene without a second thought. The assault left her with severe head injuries, and she was rushed to the hospital, clinging to life. Despite a week-long battle in the ICU, Pham succumbed to her injuries, leaving behind a shattered family and a community in disbelief. What made this crime even more disturbing was the bizarre and disproportionate motive behind the attack. The group's rage was sparked by a trivial, momentary inconvenience, a photobomb. In a world where minor social interactions can be easily brushed off, these individuals chose to react with brutal force. The idea of a simple mistake, an unintentional disruption to their photo, leading to such a violent response was not only perplexing, but highlighted an underlying issue of unchecked aggression. This was no ordinary street fight. It was a senseless act of violence fueled by pride and an inflated sense of entitlement. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the attackers were not just angry. They were seeking a form of retribution for what they saw as a public affront to their social status. Pham, a stranger to them, had become an easy target for their misplaced anger. In the end, the shocking nature of the crime and the bizarre motive behind the attack left a lasting impact. Pham's death wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a reminder of how fragile life can be, and how quickly a seemingly harmless moment can spiral into a tragedy. The case raised unsettling questions about human behavior and the thin line between minor irritations and catastrophic violence.